Hi, Professor Dyer here, talking about research in human development and family science. So, how do scientists design studies to answer those insight questions? There are a lot of qualitative designs that can be used to answer insight questions. We're just going to talk about a couple of them in this course. A general question is identified, but unlike other study designs, in qualitative research, variables and hypotheses are not generally identified in advance. The empirical process is part of how variables are identified and part of how hypotheses are generated. Those things sometimes happen in the course of qualitative research, but they're not often done before the study. Another difference between qualitative designs and the other three designs we'll talk about is that measurement tends to be quite flexible, much more so than in other designs. You'll see what I mean when I give you some examples. Finally, qualitative study designs are often used for theory building rather than theory testing. And you'll see this in the examples that I give, that we use empirical data generated from qualitative study designs in order to think about big picture issues and to develop or generate theories. So you'll see what I mean in a minute. But let's talk first about ethnographic research. Ethnography is research done to essentially describe a culture sharing group. Primarily, ethnography uses participant observation as its form of measurement, but also characteristically, ethnography will very frequently use other kinds of measures as well. They sort of start with participant observation and revolve around participant observation, but other forms of measures are used if they are determined if it is determined that might provide some interesting added information. The unit of analysis, as I've said, is the culture sharing group, and the process of ethnography is typically lengthy. We're talking many months and maybe years, very often years. A nice example of ethnography in HDFS is the work of Annette Lareau. She wrote this book on equal childhoods that has kind of shaken things up for us a bit in family science. She started with naturalistic observation in the schools, and then she went into many months of interviews with parents and analyzing those interviews. At one point, she selected 12 families for a more in-depth study, and she did this when the focus child was a fifth grader. So the families often had other children as well, but she had sort of centered on this fifth grader. The participant observation, what did that look like? It was her or one of her research assistants essentially spending time in the family home with the family, and for each family about 2 months were dedicated to them, and those 2 months included several 2 to 3 hour visits. She essentially said, treat us like the family dog, in the sense of, please allow us to be part of your household. We will be a member of your household during the time we are there, but we're not the leader of the family, and we're not here to sort of engage in deep intellectual conversation. We just want to be around and to see what's happening, be able to ask you questions about it sometimes, but we want to be sort of considered a low status member of the household so that we can just kind of see what's going on. They timed those visits so that they were there at meal times, but they also, in every household, spent at least one night in the household. They went to a doctor's visit with each of the fifth graders. They attended sporting events, so they didn't just sit in the house. If the family had left the house for some reason, then they would go with them if they could. So this is truly participant observation. Notice many contexts were being studied. The observer isn't doing anything to change those, but she is present and she asks questions, so she's a participant of the group. She doesn't just hide in a corner like a camera, but she participates in the group. If you're curious what she found, these results are a big deal in family science. She discovered essentially that parenting styles differ dramatically by social class. Perhaps surprisingly, they don't differ that much by race, but they differ by social class. And she came up with some terminology. This is part of the theory building I was talking about. She came up with some terminology that we now use to describe parenting. She said that in the middle class, parenting is about concerted cultivation. Parents work real hard, they try real hard to cultivate in their young children qualities that they're going to want in adulthood. Whereas she says the working class and poor families in her study emphasized the accomplishment of natural growth. So they thought that their children needed opportunity to kind of become what it is they would naturally grow into. And they saw that as an accomplishment and a good thing, rather than the middle class model of intentionally trying to create a particular outcome. So she made a few contrasts with each other. The middle class, parents intentionally develop their children's talents, as we've kind of already said with the concept of concerted cultivation, but they often do this through organized activities. For middle class families, she said, organized activities dominate the children's lives. They are arranged around ballet lessons, soccer practice, piano lesson, etc., etc. And the contrast is that in the poor and working class families, parents saw their role as more stepping back and allowing development to occur. So the next contrast she made is that middle class children tended to have a very robust sense of entitlement. They went to all of those settings, the dance class and the piano recital and their schools, of course, and they had the sense that they belonged there, and if they needed something in those environments, they should ask for it because it was there for them. They felt very comfortable in these kinds of institutional environments, and they felt able to get what they need there. Whereas the working class and poor children felt very constrained in those kinds of institutional settings. They did not necessarily feel like it was their entitlement to, let's say, go to office hours with their instructor. That feels a bit to them like an imposition. The third thing she noticed is that in middle class families, parents use a lot of reasoning and negotiation to convince their children of things. So when they wanted something done a certain way, they would explain to their children why they wanted it done a certain way. The model among the working class and poor families was instead to direct the children to what they kind of should be doing. And so how do you get kids to do things? The middle class model is talk them into it, and the working class model is you direct them and you get them where you want them to be, but you are the one in control of that, not the child. They wouldn't necessarily accept a child saying, no, I choose not to have that activity. Kind of to wrap it up, Lareau said that this style of parenting for middle class children offers them advantages in those institutional arenas because they feel so at home in institutions and in formal classes or with these organized activities. They excel in those, and these bring some big advantages, of course, because jobs are like that, and any institution where someone might need service, if they feel a sense of entitlement there and they feel comfortable in that environment, they're going to do better. And so for the middle class kids, they had advantages once it came to college and jobs. But there's also a downside. which will be implied when I say the working class, the advantage of kids in the working class families is that they had long stretches of leisure time. Lareau says they enjoyed their childhoods more than the middle class kids. So the middle class kids, it's almost like they're playing the long game. But the working class kids are enjoying what we think of as a true childhood. Lots of leisure time, child-initiated play, and also much more interaction with kin in the middle class families. So Lareau encouraged us to do a couple of things. One is to look at kids across multiple domains of development, and to see the complexities of their situations. You can't look at one of these lists and say, well, that's the good list and the other is the bad list. It doesn't work that way. There are advantages and disadvantages. These are very different approaches to the way people raise their children. Ethnography, and like Lareau's book, these are often published in book form because we're talking years of in-depth really highly contextualized information and distilling lessons from that. But this is a lot, and they're usually put into books because they wouldn't fit into journal articles. Like the Lareau book, a really well done ethnography has the potential to drastically change a scientific perspective on an issue. Prior to the Lareau book, we thought mostly about parenting in terms of parenting styles and good parenting, bad parenting. And Lareau's book encourages us to think differently about parenting. It's a very sociological view on parenting. And I think family science has not quite caught up yet to what this really means for the work that we do. But it's a very famous book because the ideas are so interesting and so painstakingly derived empirically.